Here's something that looks like AI made it. That's a C-130 Hercules, and that's the deck of a United States aircraft carrier. The Hercules is rolling down it, wingtip a few feet from the ship's island, about to take off. No catapult threw it down the deck. No tailhook caught it on the way in. The thing just landed, stopped, backed up, and flew off again. It really happened. Not once, but 21 times. And to this day, that airplane is still the biggest, heaviest aircraft ever to land on a carrier. Nobody has beaten the record in more than 60 years, and nobody's tried. So why did the US Navy do all of this in 1963 and then never again? The short answer is that it was only ever meant to be a test. One airplane, one ship, a few weeks in the fall of 1963 to settle a question the Navy had been chewing on. Could a cargo plane the size of a Hercules actually operate off a carrier? They needed to know because they had a problem they couldn't solve any other way. There's a job in the Navy with one of the least glamorous names in military aviation. COD. Carrier Onboard Delivery. It's exactly what it sounds like. A carrier at sea is a city of several thousand people, and it constantly needs things flown out to it. Mail, people, spare parts. COD is the delivery run. In the early 1960s, that job belonged to the Grumman C1 trader. Piston engine, short legs, small payload. Fine for a quick hop out to a carrier sitting just off the coast. Useless when the carrier was thousands of miles out with no friendly runway anywhere close. If something big broke out there, the ship had two options: do without, or sail all the way back toward land to get within range of the little delivery plane. And it couldn't even carry everything they needed. Carriers at the time had on board the F-4 Phantom and the A-5 Vigilante, both of which ran on the General Electric J79. If one of those broke and they had no spares on board, the carrier would have to dock somewhere friendly to replace it. So the Chief of Naval Operations asked the obvious question. What if you used a plane that already had the range and already had the cargo box? What if you used a Hercules? After all, the C-130 could fly the distance and swallow a J-79 without blinking. On its face, the idea may sound insane, an airplane that size operating off a carrier deck. But the C-130 had one quality that kept the idea from being crazy. It was already known for getting into and out of short, rough fields, landing and stopping in distances no airplane that big had any right to. So instead of arguing it on paper, the Navy ordered a feasibility test. They called it the Super COD. The pilot was Lieutenant James H. Flatley III. Flatley came from Navy aviation royalty and was a superb carrier pilot. By the end of his career, he'd logged 1,608 carrier landings, top 10 on the Navy's all-time list. The airplane was a KC-130F, the Marine Corps' aerial refueling tanker version of the Hercules. They didn't build a special one. They walked out to the flight line at Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point and pulled a regular fleet airplane, Buno 149798, barely a year old. The modifications were minor. They took off the external refueling pods, added a more precise airspeed indicator, swapped the anti-skid braking for the type used on a Boeing 727, and fitted a smaller orifice in the nose gear to smooth out the touchdown. That was it. A more or less normal Herc, straight out of the fleet. The ship was the USS Forrestal. So you've got the plane, the pilot, and the ship, which leaves the part that sounds impossible. How does all of this actually work? A normal carrier landing is a violent thing. A plane slams onto the deck at full throttle, catches one of several steel arresting wires with a tailhook, and gets yanked from 150 miles an hour to a standstill in about 2 seconds. Full throttle because if the hook misses the wire, the pilot needs the power to get back into the air. The Hercules did none of that. Somebody at the Patuxent River Test Center had painted "Look Ma, no hook" on the fuselage because there wasn't one. They even stripped the arresting wires off the deck entirely to spare the airplane's tires. On touchdown, Flatley pulled all 4 propellers into reverse pitch, twisting the blades so they bit into the air the opposite way. The same props that pull the airplane forward in flight were now shoving it backwards. It worked. The first full-stop landing at 85,000 pounds stopped in about 275 feet. That's shorter than a football field. So short, in fact, that the Herc came to rest before it reached where the number 4 arresting wire would have been. Getting airborne again was its own problem. There was no catapult, so the Hercules took off the way it would on any runway, by running down the deck under its own power. You might assume they bolted on JATO bottles, the strap-on rockets used for assisted short takeoffs. They didn't. After each landing, to reset for takeoff, they backed the plane up on reverse thrust. No tow tractor, no deck crew pushing. On some of the later takeoffs, they didn't even bother backing up. They left from wherever they stopped. The other problem to watch out for was wingspan. The Hercules wing is 132 feet across, and as it rolled down the deck for takeoff, the gap between that wingtip and the island, the tower that rises off the starboard side of the deck, was about 15 feet. Flatley's rule was that he wouldn't lift the nose until the wingtip was past the front of the island. The bridge, where the captain stands, sits high on that island. If Flatley rotated, pitched the nose up while the wing was still beside the tower, the airplane would rise straight up alongside the bridge with the wingtip swinging toward it. Lift off too early? You don't clear the island, you hit it. 15 feet of clearance, on a pitching deck with a plane the length of a basketball court sliding past the tower. And this wasn't just one brave landing for the cameras. It came in 2 phases. The first phase was just touch-and-go trial passes on October 30th, 1963, off Jacksonville, Florida. And the conditions were genuinely nasty. Winds of 40 to 60 knots, a deck heaving up and down something like 20 feet. The second phase, the actual full-stop landings, happened a few weeks later off Cape Cod, Massachusetts, about 500 miles out to sea, on November 8th, 21st, and 22nd. The whole project wrapped up around noon on November 22nd, 1963. If that date rings a bell, yes, it's the same day President Kennedy was assassinated, just an hour and a half later and over 2,000 miles away. Here's the full tally across all of it. 29 touch-and-go landings, 21 full-stop landings, 21 takeoffs. And they didn't do it light to make it easy. They kept adding weight, from 85,000 pounds all the way up to 121,000 pounds. At that heaviest weight, the airplane still only needed about 745 feet to take off and only around 460 feet to land. The approaches were flown right down on the edge, 5 or 6 knots above the airplane's stall speed for that weight, where a normal Hercules approach is up around 115 to 120 knots. The first full-stop approach came in at 79 knots indicated. The verdict from the test was clear. A Hercules could absolutely operate off a carrier, with a useful load, repeatedly, in bad weather. Flatley got the Distinguished Flying Cross for it, which is rare in peacetime. So the feasibility question came back, yes. Which brings us to the strange part. If it worked, why is this a piece of trivia instead of how the Navy does business? It's because a trial is not a war. Look at what putting a Hercules on a carrier actually costs you. To land one, you have to clear the entire deck. The air wing, all of it, flies off to a shore base or gets struck below into the hangar. And a carrier exists to launch and recover combat aircraft. A carrier with a giant cargo plane parked on an empty deck is, for those minutes, a carrier that can't defend itself or do its job. It's a sitting duck. The Forrestal's captain allowed the test airplane only 2 hours per visit, and you can see why. Then there's the nightmare case. What if the Herc goes down hard on the deck? A blown engine, a collapsed gear, anything that means it can't move under its own power. It's too big to push aside, and there's no room to work around it. The crew's actual contingency plan was to run steel beams through the cargo doors, hook up a crane, and push the airplane over the side into the ocean. That was the backup. Shove a multi-million-dollar airplane overboard so the carrier could function again. So the Navy looked at all of it and made the sensible call. Don't do this. Instead, they built a small, purpose-made delivery plane for the job, the Grumman C-2 Greyhound, which entered fleet service in 1966 and quietly did COD for decades. The trials were classified for about a year. Word spread through the flying community anyway, and the record just sat there. That same airplane, 149-798, went on to a long, ordinary career. Vietnam, Desert Storm, Afghanistan. It retired on March 1st, 2005, with about 26,220 hours on the airframe to the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola. Look Ma No Hook is still painted on the side. It's a testament to what a remarkable airplane the C-130 is. It can truly do anything. So, could someone land a Hercules on a carrier today? Physically, probably. The airplane can still do it. But everything that made it impractical in 1963 is still true. And a carrier deck is more crowded and more valuable now than ever. Flatley's record, the biggest and heaviest airplane ever to land on a carrier, has stood for more than 60 years. It'll probably stand forever. Not because nobody can beat it, but because nobody has a good enough reason to try. And that's the C-130 carrier landing. An airplane that wasn't supposed to fit, that pulled it off again and again anyway, set a record nobody's touched in 6 decades, and then got politely told never to come back again. If you enjoyed this video, like it, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if there's a detail about these trials I left out, or an aviation story that you think I should dig into next, drop it in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.